Everyone, I'm Daze Aghaji, and I'm an activist from the UK. I feel like in order to really tell this story of belonging, you kind of have to get to know me in some way. But let's start with the fact that a lot of the time when we talk about belonging, no one truly knows what that means, and we're living in a time of where I feel like it's the biggest crisis. So first of all, invite everyone to close their eyes, because this is going to be a slightly woo-woo hippie talk. And close your eyes and take a deep breath. And I want you to think of the time through your life, whether it was at school or in your professional careers, whether it was with your family even, your friendship group, of where you had a moment of where you felt like you just didn't quite belong. And if you've had that moment in your life, I'd like you to put your hands up. Same. This is actually a photo of me when I was about 3 years old. I've always felt like I never quite belonged. My life I've had at many different intersections, beginning with growing up in poverty. I grew up in quite severe poverty, actually, in a one-bedroom flat in the middle of Tottenham, which is in North London. And there was a time of where my mum started a restaurant that basically made us new money, and we became middle class within the space of a year. So we went from living in this one-bedroom flat to living in the six-bedroom house where I had my own room and my own bed. But that gave me a very varied experience of the world. Because first, I grew up poor, and then I knew what it's like to be at the rare end of society when society has marginalized you and doesn't care about you. But I also grew up with the privilege to know the difference as well. I grew up in a time of where I was in one of London, one of the biggest and most diverse cities in the whole world. But then I also went to boarding school at the age of about 8 and ended up finding myself the only person of color for miles in rural England. And as you can see, especially in a time like now, the fact that I'm ethnically Nigerian also, especially in the UK, makes people question whether I'm truly English. And I've always felt really English, more English than Nigerian. So my whole life, I've had to kind of dabble between these worlds and never quite feeling like I'm a member of any of them, but always slightly in the middle. So that's why when I see the large meta-crisis, people call it the poly-crisis, of the collapse of democracy, the climate crisis, the loneliness epidemic. Someone yesterday was talking about the manosphere. When I see all of those issues, I see them as something that's connected. Because at the heart of it, I recognize that the personal is also political. And the belonging that I felt like I never had plays itself out in our politics. So when I talk about belonging, it's like, what does that really mean? Especially when it's not talking about, like whether you feel like you belong, but on a societal level. But I think there's a deep yearning for us to all feel like we're part of something greater than ourselves. And this shows up in many different ways throughout our whole lives. But mostly it's about how do we learn to be in right relationship with ourselves, with other people, with place, with the planet, with Earth, but also with purpose and meaning. And I feel like the root cause of this is that the current culture that we're living in now, I feel like the root reason that this is happening is the current culture that we're living in now is so focused on atomizing us, of making us reminding ourselves that we're individuals, trying to make it so that we're not interconnected. But ultimately, what it does is it takes all the parts of us feeling like we want to belong, takes it away from us through dismantling communities, through taking away our, access to take care of ourselves, and then it sells us back as therapy. It sells it back to us as something we have to buy. And it's changed the relationships that we have with ourselves. Sorry, I'm learning this talk because it's a new one. But when I went to the English countryside for boarding school was actually the first time I found belonging. And weirdly enough, it wasn't actually with people, but it was with the natural world. The natural world became a safe place, but also became a place where I learned how to build relationship. And I realized that my belonging didn't have to come through my identity, but it comes through knowing. comes through feeling community and connection with. And when I had this realization, it totally changed the way that I viewed the world. But also, it allowed me to build this really strong connection with nature. And through that, I started learning about its stories. I started learning about its histories. And then that's when I came face to face with the enclosures. So before the 12th century, much of England's land was commonly shared and owned. I actually found out that Germany had a similar kind of common land process as well. So people would graze together, they would forage for wood, they would grow food together, and the whole thing worked on cooperation and reciprocity with ourselves, with each other, and ultimately with the earth. But they didn't just share land, they also shared cultures, songs, stories, wisdom that were encoded in all these ways that we would act together in ritualistic practices. And it created this cultural blueprint that reminded us of who we are, ultimately what we hold dear, and how we would like to live. And the fact that our survival truly depended on not just ourselves, but each other and our relationship with nature. And between the 12th and the 18th century in the UK, we started to see this process of enclosures. And this was a time where, let's say, me and you, for example, in the front row, we could go to a local park and we could grow food together, we could forage together, we could make a mutual beneficial pact to stay alive. And there was a time where we could just do that in any land. And then one day an earl came in and told us that he owned that land. And suddenly we were displaced from all the things that we would use to take care of ourselves. And that process started. And then next comes the need for wage labor, because when you've lost the connection to resource, you're having to basically work to live. And that's when you see the beginning of the economic system that we live today, of where it's heavily based on exploiting people and also the land. And then finally, a part that affected my family, and I think that's why I feel so interested in understanding the roots, was when all of this exploitation happened, it ended up being exported, this model, through colonialism. My family being from the Niger Delta, which has been affected a lot by oil extraction. So then we start to see this new cultural myth emerge for the modern time, which is that our belonging is scarce, and it has to come at the expense of someone else. It's one of scarcity. And it's one where belonging ended up being replaced by ownership, where culture ended up being replaced by consuming, not actually being a creator in itself. And as I said before, this is not very English. This is a story that happened to most of the colonial powers, of where it first started at home. They practiced it over long periods of time and then took it over to colonialism, of where they did it at fast and violent speeds. And that kind of lays the ground, I feel, for an understanding of today, of where we see disconnection being normalized. We see loneliness being a core part of human existence in modern time. The fact that we can call loneliness an epidemic, I think, is something we should all be scared of. And we see a lack of dignity when it comes to work. There was a time of where what we did was for ourselves and our community, of where we had such pride and pleasure in what we did. And now most of us probably work at a laptop, looking at a screen for 8 to 9 hours, maybe more a day, never looking outside, really forgetting what it means to belong. And I feel like a large part as well of the commons is the fact that we've totally forgot the soft skills that we would have when we're in community with one another. Like learning how to get along, learning to hear difference, learning to accept it, but also not demonizing that person in itself. And there's also a part of where we've totally forgotten that we ourselves are creators, all of us, every one of us, and not just the creative types who work in studios making artwork, but people who every day do actions that end up building the world that we live within. I feel like people have lost that consciousness, maybe because the creation that we have is not something that we see in front of us like it used to be. And this creates this deep hole that I feel like everyone, including myself, is constantly trying to fill. My vice is I love a bit of nicotine, to make me less anxious, to make me fill that hole inside of myself. And when we talk about this, we also see this in our politics. The far right in itself has grown exponentially in this time because they speak the language of belonging. They tell people that you are part of us, but the difference with their belonging is it's not a belonging that can hold all of us, it's belonging that's based on fear and exclusion. And in the UK this summer, we had some of the biggest far-right rallies that we've seen in a very long time. And they kept saying that they're here to unite a kingdom, but in actuality, they were just constantly talking about how my belonging comes at the expense of another, and this time, it's just immigrants. It's the same modern myth that we've seen that created capitalism, that created the enclosures, that created colonization. One that's based on fear, exclusion, and not interdependence. And this yearning and desire to belong isn't necessarily a problem, actually. It's probably a good thing, because it's a fundamentally human thing. But this is why I think culture needs to be a large part of how we learn how to get back onto that track of belonging. I really love this quote, because it talks about how the loss of the commons was also a loss of a common culture. And I feel like there's lots of different parts of culture that's working itself out in many different ways, but we don't have that one meta-culture that could hold us in the way that we used to. And it kind of takes me into one of my slightly niche things that I like to do, which is research about folklore and folk customs. So folk customs is quite interesting because it's a way that, one, you can have the local and the global, but you can also have this unified we, of we, the folk, the people of Earth, but also we, the person of Scarborough, we, the person of Munich, and all of those things can coexist at the same time. I came to this understanding, actually, because when I was yay high, like the photo I showed you, I actually saw these two bears. And one was a bear that I saw, a straw bear, that I saw in the Niger Delta region. And it was where my family was from. And I saw this when I was a child. And then when I was 18, I actually saw this, the Winstable bear. That was the same bear as man dressing straw from head to toe, and it was dancing around the town, looking for fruit, looking for beer, looking for coins. And I realized that we can have multiplicity and difference at the same time. And if we truly decide that culture is our way forward, we have to realize that all of us have to be a part of creating it. And that starts from us practicing our agency on a daily ritualistic basis. And it moves into us doing that together, creatively, and then us doing that in service of the earth. Because if we're truly going to build a new cultural myth of this time that can hold us through this moment of crisis, we have to come together, we have to recognize our independence is needed, and we have to recognize our part and moral obligation as part of it. Thank you.